and 17. JATAKA. As died the partridge bird. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about Khuddhaka, whose story will be found in the 13th book in the Nikàya JATAKA. Said the master, as now, brethren, so also in former times, Khuddhaka's tongue has worked his destruction. So saying, he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the bodhisattva was born a Brahmin in the north country. When he grew up, he received a complete education at Taxila, and, renouncing lusts, gave up the world to become a hermit. He won the 5 knowledges and the 8 attainments, and all the hermits of the Himalayas to the number of 500 assembled together and followed him as their master. Insight was his as he lived amid his disciples in the Himalayas. In those days there was an ascetic suffering from jaundice who was chopping wood with an axe. And a chattering brother came and sat by him, and directed his work, asking him give here a chop and there a chop, till the jaundiced ascetic lost his temper. In a rage he cried, "Who are you to teach me how to chop wood?" And lifting up his keen-edged axe stretched the other dead with a single blow. And the bodhisattva had the body buried. Now on an anthill hard by the hermitage there lived a partridge bird which early and late was always piping on the top of the anthill. Recognizing the note of a partridge bird, a sportsman killed the bird and took it off with him. Missing the bird's note, the bodhisattva asked the hermits why they did not hear their neighbor the partridge bird now. Then they told him what had happened, and he linked the 2 events together in the stanza. As died the partridge bird for her clamorous cry, so idle talk and chatter doomed this fool to die. Having developed within himself the 4 perfect states, the bodhisattva thus became destined to rebirth in the Brahma realm. Said the master, brethren, as now, so also in former days Khuddhaka's tongue has worked his destruction. And at the close of this lesson he identified the birth by saying, Khuddhaka was the meddling ascetic of those days, my followers the band of hermits, and I their master. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. JATAKA number 118. Vataka JATAKA. The Thoughtless Man. This story the master told while at Jetavana monastery, about the son of over-treasurer. This over-treasurer is said to have been a very rich man of Shravasti city, and his wife became the mother of a righteous being from the realm of Brahma archangels, who grew up as lovely as Brahma. Now one day when the Khuddhaka festival had been proclaimed in Shravasti city, the whole city gave itself up to the festivities. His companions, sons of other rich men, had all got wives, but over-treasurer's son had lived so long in the Brahma realm that he was purged from passion. His companions plotted together to get him to a sweetheart and make him keep the feast with them. So going to him they said, "Dear friend, it is the great feast of Khuddhaka. Can't we get a sweetheart for you too, and have a good time together?" At last his friends picked out a charming girl and decorated her out, and left her at his house, with directions to make her way to his chamber. But when she entered the room, not a look or a word did she get from the young merchant. Annoyed at this slight to her beauty, she put on all her graces and feminine blandishments, smiling meantime so as just to show her pretty teeth. The sight of her teeth suggested bones, and his mind was filled with the idea of bones, till the girl's whole body seemed to him nothing but a chain of bones. Then he gave her money and asked her to leave. But as she came out of the house a nobleman saw her in the street and gave her a present to accompany him home. At the end of 7 days the festival was over. And the girl's mother, seeing her daughter did not come back, went to the young merchant's friends and asked where she was, and they in turn asked the young merchant. And he said he had paid her and sent her packing as soon as he saw her. Then the girl's mother insisted on having her daughter restored to her, and brought the young man before the king, who proceeded to examine into the matter. In answer to the king's questions, the young man admitted that the girl had been passed on to him, but said he had no knowledge of her whereabouts, and no means of producing her. Then said the king, if he fails to produce the girl, execute him. So the young man was then hauled off with his hands tied behind his back to be executed, and the whole city was in an uproar at the news. With hands laid on their breasts the people followed after him with cryings, saying, "What means this, sir? You suffer unjustly." Then thought the young man, "All this sorrow has happened to me because I was living a lay life. If I can only escape this danger, I will give up the world and join the brotherhood of the great Gautam, the all-enlightened one." Now the girl herself heard the uproar and asked what it meant. Being told, she ran swiftly out, crying, "Stand aside, sirs! Let me pass! Let the king's men see me!" As soon as she had thus shown herself, she was handed over to her mother by the king's men, who set the young man free and went their way. Surrounded by his friends, the son of over-treasurer went down to the river and bathed. Returning home, he breakfasted and let his parents know his resolve to give up the world. Then taking cloth for his ascetic's robe, and followed by a great crowd, he searched out the master and with due salutation asked to be admitted to the brotherhood. A novice first, and afterwards a full brother, he meditated on the idea of bondage till he gained insight, and not long afterwards won arhatship. Now one day in the hall of truth the assembled brethren talked of his virtues. Recalling how in the hour of danger he had recognized the excellence of the truth, and, wisely resolving to give up the world for its sake, had won that highest fruit which is arhatship. And as they talked, the master entered, and, on his asking, was told what was the subject of their talk. On which he told them that, like the son of over-treasurer, the wise of former times, by taking thought in the hour of peril, had escaped death. So saying, he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the bodhisattva by change of birth was born a quail. Now in those days there was a quail catcher who used to catch numbers of these birds in the forest and take them home to fatten. When they were fat, he used to sell them to people and so make a living. And one day he caught the bodhisattva and brought him home with a number of other quails. Thought the bodhisattva to himself, "If I take the food and drink he gives me, I shall be sold. While if I don't eat it, I shall get so thin, that people will notice it and pass me over, with the result that I shall be safe. This, then, is what I must do." So he fasted and fasted till he got so thin that he was nothing but skin and bone, and not a soul would have him at any price. Having disposed of every one of his birds except the bodhisattva, the bird catcher took the bodhisattva out of the cage and laid him on the palms of his hand to see what ailed the bird. Watching when the man was off his guard, the bodhisattva spread his wings and flew off to the forest. Seeing him return, the other quails asked what had become of him so long, and where he had been. Then he told them he had been caught by a hunter. And, being asked how he had escaped, replied, that it was by a means he had thought of, namely, not to take either the food or the drink which the hunter supplied. So saying, he uttered this stanza: "The thoughtless man no profit reaps. But see thought's fruit in me, from death and bondage free." In this manner did the bodhisattva speak of what he had done. His lesson ended, the master identified the birth by saying, "I was the quail that escaped death in those days." Source: adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. JATAKA number 119. Akalaravi JATAKA. No parents trained. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about a brother who used to be noisy at wrong seasons. He is said to have come of a good Sravasti city family and to have given up the world for the truth, but to have neglected his duties and despised instruction. He never took count of the hours for duties, for ministry, or for reciting the texts. Throughout the 3 watches of the night, as well as the hours of waking, he was never quiet, so that the other brethren could not get a wink of sleep. Accordingly, the brethren in the hall of truth criticized his conduct. Entering the hall and learning on inquiry what they were talking about, the master said, "Brethren, as now, so in past times, this brother was noisy out of season, and for his unseasonable conduct was strangled." So saying he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the bodhisattva was born into a northern Brahmin family, and when he grew up, learned all knowledge and became a teacher of worldwide fame with 500 young Brahmins studying under him. Now these young Brahmins had a cock who crowed early and woke them to their studies. And this cock died. So they looked all about for another, and one of their number, when picking up firewood in the cemetery grove, saw a cock there which he brought home and kept in a keep. But, as the second cock had been bred in a cemetery, he had no knowledge of times and seasons, and used to crow casually, at midnight as well as at daybreak. Woken up by his crowing at midnight, the young Brahmins fell to their studies. By dawn they were tired out and could not for sleepiness keep their attention on the subject. And when he fell in crowing in broad day they did not get a chance of quiet for repeating their lesson. And as it was the cocks crowing both at midnight and by day which had brought their studies to a standstill, they took the bird and wrung his neck. Then they told their teacher that they had killed the cock that crowed in and out of season. Said their teacher, for their understanding, it was his bad bringing up that brought this cock to his end. So saying, he uttered this stanza. No parents trained, no teacher taught this bird. Both in and out of season was he heard. Such was the bodhisattva's teaching on the matter. And when he had lived his allotted time on earth, he passed away to fare according to his deeds. His lesson ended, the master identified the birth as follows: this brother was the cock of those times, who did not know when not to crow. My disciples were the young Brahmins, and I their teacher. Source: adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. JATAKA number 120. Bandhanamokha JATAKA. While wrongdoing speech, the story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about the Brahmin girl Chincha, whose history will be given in the 12th book in the Mahapaduma Jataka. On this occasion the master said, Brethren, this is not the first time Chincha has laid false accusations against me. She did the like in other times. So saying, he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the bodhisattva was born into the priest's family, and on his father's death succeeded to the priestcy. Now the king promised to grant whatsoever boon his queen should ask of him, and she said, the boon I ask is an easy one. From now on you must not look on any other woman with eyes of love. At first he refused, but, wearied by her unceasing importunity, was obliged to give way at last. And from that day forward he never cast a glance of love at any one of his 16,000 dancing girls. Now a disturbance arose on the borders of his kingdom. And after 2 or 3 engagements with the robbers, the troops there sent a letter to the king saying that they were unable to carry the matter through. Then the king was anxious to go in person and assembled a mighty army. And he said to his wife, Dear one, I go to the frontier, where battles will rage ending in victory or defeat. The camp is no place for a woman, and you must stay behind here. I can't stop if you go, my lord, said she. But finding the king firm in his decision, she made the following request instead: every league, send a messenger to inquire how I am. And the king promised to do so. Accordingly, when he marched out with his army, leaving the bodhisattva in the city, the king sent back a messenger at the end of every league to let the queen know how he was, and to find out how she was doing. Of each man as he came she asked what brought him back. And on receiving the answer that he was come to learn how she was doing, then queen made gesture to the messenger to her and had intercourse with him. Now the king journeyed 32 leagues and sent 32 messengers, and the queen had intercourse with them all. And when he had pacified the frontier, to the great joy of the inhabitants, he started on his homeward journey, dispatching a second series of 32 messengers. And the queen had intercourse with each one of these, as before. Halting his victorious army near the city, the king sent a letter to the bodhisattva to prepare the city for his entry. The preparations in the city were done, and the bodhisattva was preparing the palace for the king's arrival, when he came to the queen's apartments. The sight of his great appearance so moved the queen that she called to him to satisfy her lust. But the bodhisattva pleaded with her, urging the king's honor, and protesting that he withdrew from all sin and would not do as she wished. No thoughts of the king frightened 64 of the king's messengers, said she. And will you for the king's sake fear to do my will? Said the bodhisattva, had these messengers thought with me, they would not have acted thus. As for me that know the right, I will not commit this sin. Don't talk nonsense, said she. If you refuse, I will have your head chopped off. So be it. Cut off my head in this or in 100,000 existences. Yet will I not do your asking. All right. I will see, said the queen menacingly. And retiring to her chamber, she scratched herself, put oil on her limbs, clad herself in dirty clothes and feigned to be ill. Then she sent for her slaves and asked them to tell the king, when he should ask after her, that she was ill. Meantime the bodhisattva had gone to meet the king, who, after marching round the city in procession, entered his palace. Not seeing the queen, he asked where she was, and was told that she was ill. Entering the royal bedchamber, the king caressed the queen and asked what ailed her. She was silent. But when the king asked the third time, she looked at him and said, though my lord the king still lives, yet poor women like me have to own a master. What do you mean? The priest whom you left to watch over the city came here on with posture of seeing after the palace. And because I would not yield to his will, he beat me to his heart's content and went off. Then the king fumed with rage, like the crackling of salt or sugar in the fire. And he rushed from the chamber. Calling his servants, he asked them to bind the priest with his hands behind him, like one condemned to death, and cut off his head at the place of execution. So away they hurried and bound the bodhisattva. And the drum was beaten to announce the execution. Thought the bodhisattva, doubtless that wicked queen has already poisoned the king's mind against me, and now must I save myself from this peril. So he said to his captors, bring me into the king's presence before you kill me. Why so? Said they. Because, as the king's servant, I have toiled greatly on the king's business, and know where great treasures are hidden which I have discovered. If I am not brought before the king, all this wealth will be lost. So lead me to him, and then do your duty. Accordingly, they brought him before the king, who asked why reverence had not restrained him from such wickedness. Sire, answered the bodhisattva, I was born a Brahmin, and have never taken the life so much as of an ant. I have never taken what was not my own, even to a blade of grass. Never have I looked with lustful eyes upon another man's wife. Not even in jest have I spoken falsely, and not a drop of strong drink have I ever drunk. Innocent am I, sire. But that wicked woman took me lustfully by the hand, and, being rebuffed, threatened me, nor did she retire to her chamber before she had told me her secret evil-doing. For there were 64 messengers who came with letters from you to the queen. Send for these men and ask each whether he did as the queen asked him or not. Then the king had the 64 men bound and sent for the queen. And she confessed to having had intercourse with the men. Then the king ordered off all the 64 to be beheaded. But at this point the bodhisattva cried out, no, sire, the men are not to blame. For they were constrained by the queen. For which reason pardon them. And as for the queen, she is not to blame, for the passions of women are insatiate, and she does but act according to her inborn nature. For which reason, pardon her also, O king. Upon this request the king was merciful, and so the bodhisattva saved the lives of the queen and the 64 men, and he gave them each a place to dwell in. Then the bodhisattva came to the king and said, Sire, the baseless accusations of wrongdoing put the wise in unmerited bonds, but the words of the wise release the foolish. Thus wrongdoing wrongfully binds, and wisdom sets free from bonds. So saying, he uttered this stanza. While wrongdoing's speech did bind unrighteously, at wisdom's word the justly bound go free. When he had taught the king the truth in these verses, he exclaimed, "All this trouble sprang from my living a lay life. I must change my mode of life, and crave your permission, sire, to give up the worldly life." And with the king's permission he gave up the worldly life and left his tearful relations and his great wealth to become a hermit. His living was in the Himalayas, and there he won the higher knowledges and the attainments and became destined to rebirth in the Brahma realm. His teaching ended, the master identified the birth by saying, "Chincha was the wicked queen of those days, Ananda the king, and I his priest."